Hey, what's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Hopefully having a great day. In today's episode of creating a Roblox simulator, we are going to be scripting the functionality of the buy all button in our Shop GUI. As always, if this video does help you guys out or you guys do enjoy it, make sure you smash the like button and also hit the subscribe button and turn those post notifications on if you guys want to get notified when I upload more Roblox development content. Additionally, I do have a Patreon. If you guys would like to support me and gain access to all the scripts and the actual game file that I make in this video, there's a link down below in the description. You guys go check it out and support me. With that being said, let's get right into it. So in the last episode, we scripted the actual purchasing system behind our Shop GUI. So we could click on an item and we could click buy, and if we had enough money, we would actually be able to buy this specific item and it would be equipped. What we want to do in this episode though is we want to create a buy all button, which when we click it, it comes up with a confirmation screen and it actually has a little shadow on the background. So you see the entire background becomes a little bit darker. And then if we click the X, it does nothing. And if we click yes, it'll actually purchase all of the items which we can afford and it'll equip the best one that we've purchased. Additionally, when we click the buy all button and we click yes to confirm that we want to buy all possible items, even if we don't buy any items at all, it'll just equip the best item that we can possibly have. So that's the functionality that we want to have behind buy all button. So to be able to do anything with the buy all button, let's go into our handler script, which of course is inside of our starter GUI, our shop, and then we can see the handler right here. Then we want to make a variable for the buy all button, and we're going to set that to frame.buyAllButton, which is right there. And of course, we can now listen to every single time it's clicked. So I'll put that directly under the buy button that we have set up right now. We'll say buy all button, mouse click, connect, and then we will just do a simple print buy all to know that this actually worked. Of course, once we click the button, we can see buy all has been printed, so we're now connected to the button. Sweet. Now, to set up the actual logic behind the buy all button, we're going to go inside of the manager, and right below the buy function, we're going to create a new function called shop.buyAll, and it's going to take no arguments, and there we go. So the logic behind the buy all button, whenever a player clicks the buy all button, we want to first determine what shop they're currently using. We've already done this before, and we can actually view that inside of probably a couple of different functions. The one that I'm going to use, for example, is the new function right down here, where we have the list variable, and then we set that to one of the config files based off of whatever the shop is currently. So if it's food, then it's the tool config. If it's DNA, then it's the DNA config. Otherwise, it'll be the rank config. So we can just copy that and put that inside of the buy all. Now, rather than using shop, we will use the current shop variable, which is declared inside of the new function. Additionally, we're not going to be using the buy all button for ranks. So we actually want to remove that else, and we could just remove this else if right here as well. And there we go. Now we are only going to do this for the food, which would be the tool config and the DNA config. The reason we're not doing this for the rank config is because in Eating Simulator, they actually have the buy all button completely disabled, so we're replicating that. Now that we know what type of items the player wants to buy, we also want to easily check which of those items they currently own. We already have an owns item function, but it does need to be moved above the buy all function. So let's go ahead and take that, and we're also going to take the has equipped function just to keep the consistency and stay organized, and we're going to put it directly under the refresh GUI function, and there we go. Since we can now easily check if the player owns a specific item, let's loop through the list of items and make sure that the player doesn't own the item already. We can do this by saying for course tool name, tool table, in pairs, and list. Do. And there we go. Now we want to see if the player does not own the item. So we're going to say if not owns item, and then we're going to provide the tool name and the current shop, and then we'll do something. Now we want to check if the player can afford that item. So we're going to say if tool table dot price is less than or equal to player dot leader stats dot coins dot value, then so that'll check if the player has enough money to actually purchase the tool. And if the player doesn't have enough money to purchase the tool, then we actually want to break out of this for loop because there's no point in continuing it. So of course, if the player can afford the tool, then we want the player to actually buy it. And we already have that set up here. So what we can do is we can copy this right here, and this is where we actually call the remote function, which is the shop buy, which handles buying an item, and we can paste that right into here. And then we're going to say if result equals purchased, then, and we're just going to refresh the GUI just like how we do above here. And we are going to provide tool name to the refresh GUI. So just to recap, when we call this function, we're going to get a list of the specific item types. Then we're going to go through that list, and for each item, we're going to check if the player owns it. If the player does not own it, then we're going to check if the player can afford to purchase it. And if they can't, then we're going to break the loop. If the player can afford to purchase it, we're going to go ahead and purchase that item, and then we're going to send some data. Now we actually have to adjust clicked item to tool name so that we can tell the server what item we want to purchase, and we're going to give the current shop to tell the server what type of item that we're going to purchase as well to make it easier to find. And then we're going to get the result. And if the result is purchased, we're going to refresh the GUI to show the newest item that's been equipped and to show that the items have been purchased. Now, there's actually a little issue though with the shop by remote function. If we look inside of the shop server, we can scroll down and we can see where this is actually called. So shop by, and now let's look inside of this function. We accept the player, we accept item, which is an any, and then we accept the shop, which is a string. Where do we actually use the item at? Well, if we look right here, when we're declaring these two variables, we say tool name and tool table equals get item, and in the get item function, we provide item.name and the shop. So the issue here is when we're actually calling this inside of the manager with the original buy function, we're actually passing through the clicked item. The clicked item is actually a text button that we're passing through, and that's why we have to use .name on it so that we can get the name property of that specific clicked item on the server. The thing is though, is that we're unnecessarily passing through the GUI object to the server. An easier way and a more optimized and efficient way would just be to pass the actual string to the server so that we don't have to send an entire object. And then that'll also make it easier and more compatible with the buy all function as well. So come to the original buy function, and instead of sending through the clicked item, we're going to send through the clicked item.name, which is just a string. Then in the buy all function, I actually made a mistake with tool table. We're going to be sending the tool name, not the tool table through, because we want to send the string, which is going to be the item name. So then we want to go into the shop.server, and instead of saying any, let's specify this to a string because that's what we're going to get. And then when we use item, we no longer need to look for the name property because a string will not have a name property. We just need to provide the string, and that'll work perfectly. Additionally, let's change the variable name from item to item name because that's more specific and easier to understand. So now that we cleared up that issue, we now have a good amount of functionality behind the buy all button, and we should make sure that the buy button works as well. So let's go ahead and test this out and verify that it's working. Before we can actually use the buy all function, we need to go inside of the handler and actually call the function when we click the buy all button. So we're going to say manager.buyAll, and then when we click the buy all button, it will call that function. We can go ahead and start up our game and test this out. So now we're on the DNA screen, and let's just go ahead and try to make sure that the buy button still works, and it does work, and we can equip, unequip, and do everything else like that, so that's great. The buy function still works perfectly, and now let's go ahead and click buy all. And now we actually see an issue. It seemed like French fry 3 was actually purchased before French fry 2, and then French fry 2, and then French fry 2 was actually equipped, although French fry 3 should have actually been equipped instead. So now we need to fix this and get them to be purchased in the correct order. The reason that this actually occurs, if we go inside of the manager and we look inside of our for loop, we're actually using pairs. Now I made a pretty bad oversight, which I am massively improving on, because before I make future episodes, I'm making documentation on them and planning it out a lot better. So originally when I made all these different config files, I had a bad idea of actually setting them up as dictionaries rather than arrays. So what we want to do with all three of the config files that we've currently made, we want to actually adjust them to arrays instead of dictionaries so that we can use iPairs to loop through them. And if you guys aren't sure why we want to use iPairs rather than pairs, when we're using pairs, there is no order. So for instance, when we clicked buy all, it actually started to loop at French fry, then it went to French fry 3, and then French fry 2. If we turn this into an array, it'll go French fry, then French fry 2, then French fry 3, and that'll be very nice, and that could actually help us remove order from here as well if we wanted to. Although I probably won't do that because it's unnecessary, being able to use iPairs is still so much more convenient. So to easily change our config files into arrays, what we're going to do is we are going to copy this, delete that, and then make a new property inside of here called ID, and then set that to a string with whatever the sort of naming is that we used here. So instead of French fry equals, we're just going to say the ID equals French fry, and then we're going to do that for all of these as well. It might get you a little bit confused why we have a name field here and then why we have an ID. Think of name as sort of the display name, the name that's actually going to look nice. And the way to look at this is we have spaces between these words. This is what the player is supposed to see. So they'll see French fry 2, and then for our backend system, we're going to be using IDs. So we're going to be using a combination of words like French fry 2, and that's the difference between ID and name. So then for the last one, once again, we're going to say ID equals, and there we go. Now the tool config is done. We need to also do this with the DNA config and ranks as well. So I just finished DNA, and now I have to do ranks, and there we go. Ranks is finished as well. So remember, we're pretty much just removing the name at the beginning where we set the name equal to this table, and we're pretty much just moving it inside of the table, so now we can easily loop through these. Now that we've converted them from dictionaries to arrays, we actually have to update all of the usages of these specific tables. Considering how our project is currently set up, we use all of the tables together. And what I mean by that is when we call them in a file, like for example in Manager, we're calling all three of the files together. So what we could easily do is we can hit Control Shift F, and that'll find all the instances where this specific word is written in our project. So I'm going to look for tool config, and by just looking for tool config, we'll then also know that there's most likely rank config and DNA config in the same files as well, so we'll fix those too. So let's start off in shop server. We can see that we call tool config here, and then let's hit Control F and see where we actually use it at. So right here we create the normal list variable, and we have tool name and tool table in pairs. So right here we want to change pairs to iPairs. Then rather than tool name, we are going to say underscore, and we can still say tool table. Now right here we check if the item name, which is going to be provided to us in this function, is equal to, we previously used tool name. Now instead of tool name, we're actually going to do tool table.id. So anytime we see tool name, we just replace that with tool table.id. And what that means, of course, is right inside of here would be the ID. And that's exactly the same as when it was on the outside rather than being inside of this table. So now we just fixed this for loop. Let's go ahead and check if there are any other usages inside of this file. And yeah, there's no more usages inside this file. So that's all fixed inside of shop. We can minimize that. Now we'll go ahead inside of the tool manager, and then we can see the tool config is used right here. So iPairs underscore tool table, and then tool table.id equals the player tool. And there we go. We got the tool manager fixed. We can close that and that. Now let's look at player data, which is going to be a little bit more work. Let's search for the occurrences, and we can see right down here, we have the tool config. Let's change that to iPairs underscore the tool table.id, and we need to use that one more time. Now inside of here as well, we want to search for rank config, and then we can see the same thing right here. So we have the rank table, and we're going to do rank table.id and copy that here as well. And then DNA table, and we can see it's used right here. So iPairs underscore DNA table.id, and there we go. And we can check if there's any other usages, and no, these are the only 3 usages. Well, actually, let's search up DNA config, and we can see that no, there's only 1 usage right there. Perfect. So now we're done with player data, and the last one is inside of our shop manager. So we have the tool config right here, and then let's look for all the times that we actually use it. So we can see inside of the by all function, change that to iPairs, change that to underscore. And if you guys don't know, the reason we're changing it to underscore is because we don't use it. If you're not using the key in the loop, then you set that to underscore, and that's the best practice to do when doing for loops. So we're gonna have the tool table.id, and then we're gonna copy this for all the times that we use tool name, and then there we go. Now let's check the other occurrences. So we have the tool config used here, set that to iPairs underscore, and then we can also just replace this as well. So tool table.id. So boom, 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 boom. And there we go. Okay, perfect. So let's go ahead and check if we use the config one more time. So we see the by all function, we see the new function, and that's it. Okay, awesome. So this should be good. Let's go back inside of our player data. Let's clear our player data real quick, start the game, and see if it all functions as normal to make sure we made all the necessary changes. So we can look inside of food, and if we didn't make the correct changes, the food most likely wouldn't actually be generated. So we know that this worked out. If we look inside of our Explorer, inside of players, monster, inventory, own DNA, we can see all of the different types of DNA and the retro regular with the value set to true as it should be. And we can see the French fry. The first one is set to true as it should be. And then we see the other French fries as well. So everything looks good and it doesn't look like we're having any issues. Now we can actually test the by all function because it should function correctly. So let's go ahead and click by all, and we can actually see really quickly it went from French fry 2 directly to French fry 3. And now we see the last French fry that we actually own is French fry 3, and it also equipped that one as well. So that works perfectly. Sweet. So the functionality behind the buy all button seems to be finished, but we're missing a few things from Eating Simulator's system. One, we want to have a confirmation come up when we actually click the buy all button, and we also want it to be able to equip the best tool that we have purchased. And then also, when we go over to the rank shop, we want the buy all button to be hidden, just like in Eating Simulator. So now what we want to do is we're going to actually create the Confirmation GUI. Let's go inside of the Shop GUI. We have our frame there. Let's go ahead and add in another frame. We'll call this frame Confirmation, and then we will center it in the middle of our screen. And I actually should have resized it a little bit larger before I did that, but that's fine. Resize it like that, and then once again, let's set the position. So 0.5, comma 0, comma 0.5, comma 0, and that's pretty good. The size isn't bad at all. Then we want to change the background color to the lighter blue, and I'm actually going to add that custom color so we have it saved. So there we go. That's the similar blue that they have. Then we want to add UI corner to this. The UI corner, we probably want it to be like 0.10, so that's pretty good. That's not bad. Let's also look at mobile. Oh yeah, we have to adjust the sizing of it as well. We have to adjust the sizing of it to scale as well, which I should have done first. Now we have the sizing. Let me just drag it to be smaller, adjusting the position again. Okay, so there we go. That's pretty good. We got the sizing down. It works on mobile. We've got the color down. We've got the curve down. Now we want to add a text label to this, and we want the background color to be completely transparent. We want the text color to be white. We want the text to actually say buy all possible items, question mark, and we want it to be scaled. Let's size this up real quick. So we'll make it like that big, I would say. So I think that's pretty decent size. And then let's position this in the middle. And then we actually want to bring it up a little bit. So we'll set that to 0.1 and that to 0.1. So that looks pretty good. Then we also want to change the font to probably something like Gotham Bold, I guess. I don't know. I'm not 100% sure what font they're using, but that looks fine. Then inside of the original frame that we made, we have the exit button. Let's go ahead and duplicate that and drag that into the confirmation frame. And there we go. We now have the exit button perfectly aligned for us. We could make it a little bit bigger if we want to, but I'm fine with that. Then we want to add a text button, but honestly, I think we'll just like copy the buy all button or one of the other buttons that we've made from our original frame, because we already have the whole like layout and the design and everything like that. We only have to make a couple of adjustments instead. We're going to set the position of this to 0.5. So there we go. We have it centered. We actually want to make it a little bit bigger. So there we go. We made it a little bit bigger. Let's also adjust this to be a little bit lower as well. We probably want it to be like 80% of the way down. I think that's decent. Let's also make this like a little bit larger, and that's pretty similar to what they actually have. It might be off by a little bit, but it's not bad. Now we also want to adjust the text of the buy all button to yes, and then we're going to call this confirmation button, because that'll be the confirmation button that we're going to click on to confirm that we do want to buy all the possible items. Now we're going to add another frame to the Shop GUI, and this is going to be called shadow. This is actually going to produce the shadow effect, which will cover the entire screen except for the confirmation window. So we're going to set the background color of this to black. We're going to set the size of this to the entire screen, and we want the transparency to actually be like 0.7, and now we can see we actually have a pretty good shadow effect right there. What we then want to do is we want to adjust the z-index of the confirmation frames. So we want to adjust this to 2, and now that'll be over top of the shadow. So now we have the shadow effect, and it's directly behind the confirmation window, and it covers everything else. And now we're pretty much good for the confirmation window and also the shadow as well. What we then want to do is we want to set the visibility of both of these to false, because of course when we open the shop, we don't want those to be visible. We only want them to be visible when we click the buy all button. So let's make that possible. Let's go inside of our handler, and then we want to make a variable for both the confirmation and the shadow frame. So we're going to say confirmation frame equals shop GUI dot confirmation, and then I'm just going to copy this, paste that, and change that to shadow, because that's going to be shadow frame. So there we go. We've got both of those frames, and now when we click buy all, what we want to actually do is we want to make them both visible. Inside of the buy all, we're going to say confirmation frame dot visible equals true, and shadow frame dot visible equals true. We then also want to assign variables for both the exit button and the confirmation button as well, so we can use those. So we're going to say local confirmation. I'm just going to copy the name from there because it'll be a little bit easier, and make sure I spell everything right, equals confirmation frame dot confirmation button. Then we have local confirmation exit button equals confirmation frame dot exit button. And there we go. Now we can use both of those. And I'll put those below our original exit button. So we're going to say confirmation exit button dot mouse button one click connect function. And then what we're going to do is when we click on the exit button, we're going to actually make these not visible. So we're going to say false and false so that we no longer see them. And then if we click the confirmation button, we're going to say confirmation button dot click connect function. And now when we actually click the confirmation button, we are going to call the buy all function. We're not going to do that when we click the buy all button. We're going to do that when we actually confirm that we do want to buy all. So there we go. We can go ahead and start up our game and see if that works. So we click on buy all, and we can see buy all item possible comes up, and the shadow behind it comes up. And then if we click the exit, we can see that then goes away. And if we click yes, then, well, we don't see anything happening right now, but it should buy all the items. We can actually try this with DNA because we don't have the third item purchased. And we can actually see that, yeah, with DNA, it did purchase the second item. So that's good. The only issue here is, though, is that when we click yes, the screen screen actually doesn't go away. So we also need to add that as well. So whenever we click the confirmation button, we also want to make sure that the confirmation frame and the shadow frame disappears as well. So there we go. Now what we want to do is we want to be able to use that buy all button as a way to equip the best item that the player owns, even if they don't purchase any new items. Now there's a couple of different ways that we could go about this. If we look inside of the buy all function, this is the only time that we would need to equip the best tool that the player owns currently. We could adjust the shop by function to accommodate for what we're wanting to do, but the reason that I don't want to do that is because this function is more bloated than I actually intended it for it to originally be. The shop by function isn't just a buy function. It also handles unequipping, equipping, purchasing, and if the player doesn't have enough money. It does handle all the things that it needs to, but I don't want to add more things to this function which are unnecessary. I'd rather handle it separately and apart from this specific function. Another option that we have is creating a remote event called equip best item, and then we could listen for that remote inside of here, and then we could just automatically equip the player's best item. But there's a way to make that even better. Instead of doing that, we can create a remote event called equip item, and when we do that, we'll send over the item and the type that we want to equip. The reason that I want to do that is because that remote event has a lot more flexibility, and we could even use that same remote event in a couple of different places when we continue to make our game. Whereas equipping the best item most likely is probably just going to be a one-time scenario that we're only ever going to use once. But of course, if we create an equip item remote, there's a higher chance that can be used in a lot of other areas rather than making one very specific remote event to do the same thing. So that's what we're going to do. Inside of the replicate storage, inside the remotes folder, we're going to add another remote event, and that is going to be called equip item. Then we're going to listen for that inside of the shop server. So we're going to listen for this to be used, and then we're going to accept the player. We'll accept the item name, which will be a string, and then we'll also accept the item type, which will be a string as well. When a player tells the server that they want to equip the specific item, we want to check if the player actually owns that item. And we already have a function for that. So we're going to say if owns item, then we're going to pass through the player, the item name, and the item type. So if the player does own the item, then we just want to equip it. And we already have a function for that as well. So we're going to say equip, we're going to give them the player, the item name, and the item type, and there we go. The tool will be equipped for that player. Perfect. Now then we want to go back inside of the manager, inside of the buy all, and at the very end of the script, like after the for loop, we want to call the equip item remote event and pass through the best item that we currently own. So we can go ahead and call that inside of the remotes, equip item, buyer server, and now we actually need to find the best tool that the player currently owns. So we're going to go ahead and make a new function. We'll make that right below our owns item. We're going to say local function best item, and we won't take any arguments. And now to find the best item, we of course need to get the list of the items that we currently want to look through. So we could just copy this that we already have down here and paste that right there. So there we go. And I'm also not going to do this for ranks because ranks isn't going to need to use this, so I'm not going to add compatibility for it. Then we're going to go ahead and loop through the list. Tool table, in, iPairs, list, do. So now what's going to do, it's going to go through this config file. It's going to check this tool, and then we want to see if the player owns the tool. So we're going to say if owns item, tooltable.id, and current shop. So if the player does own the item, now we want to actually create a variable outside of the for loop. We're just going to say local item, and we're not going to set the value of this to anything. Then if the player does own that item, we actually want to set the value of our item variable to that specific item. So we're going to say tooltable.id. So it's going to go through each item. It's going to go through this item, and if the player owns it, then it's going to set the value of the tool variable that we had to French fry. Then it's going to check French fry 2. And if the player owns this tool, then it's going to set the value to French fry 2. And then it's going to do the same thing for 3. Now the other thing is that if the player doesn't own the tool, we actually just once again want to break the loop. And the reason for that is because if the player doesn't own French fry 1, he's not going to own French fry 2. So there's no point in continuing through this loop. We already have all the information that we want and need. Once this loop finishes or breaks, item will then be the best tool that we actually own because that was the last one in the list. So then what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and return item, and that'll return the best item that the player currently owns. So then we can come back down to the buy all function, and we'll just create a variable called best item, and we will set that to the best item function. And then inside of Fire server, we'll go ahead and throw in that variable. So we'll tell the server the best item that we want to equip, and we'll tell them the category as well, which will be current shop. Now that we have that, that'll equip the tool for us. We also want to refresh the GUI as well, because that's what happens every time we purchase an item or we equip the item, which we can see up here. So then we want to call refresh GUI, and we want to call that with the best item. So now we'll equip the best item that we have, and the GUI will also show that respectively. Let's go ahead and start this up to test it out. So we can see that that we own French fry 3. Let's go ahead and click on buy all, confirm that we do want to buy all, and we can see French fry 3 now has been equipped, both actually in the game, and it also displayed that in the GUI as well. So that worked flawlessly. So now that's done, we now want to hide the buy all button in the rank shop. So let's go inside of the handler and look at when we actually click the ranks button. We can see right here, this is where we actually go and switch over to the rank shop. What we're going to do is when we click this button, we're actually going to set the buy all button, the visibility of it, to false. And we want to make sure that we do that after we call the manager.new on ranks. And the reason for that is because after we make it not visible, imagine we click to the DNA shop after being on the rank shop. When we click over to the DNA shop, the buy all button is not going to be shown because we set the visibility to false, but never set the visibility back to true. So now what we want to do is we want to go inside of the manager, and then we want to go down to the new function. And we can even do this at the very beginning. We want to set the buy all button, but we also do need to initialize that into a variable first. So let's go ahead and set that somewhere in here. There's not exactly a place for it, I don't think, but that's fine. I'll put it right here. So we have the buy all button, and then go down to our new function. And now every time the new function is called, we want to set the visibility of the buy all button to true. So we always want to make it visible every single time we look at a new shop. And then whenever we call the rank shop, it'll call the new, pass through ranks, and it'll set the visibility of the button to true when we call this. But then directly after, we're going to set it to false, so the player won't actually see it ever. So let's go ahead and start that up and test this out. So we can see on food, we can see buy all. If we click DNA, we can see buy all. And if we click ranks, we no longer see buy all. Perfect. What if we click ranks again? Every time we click ranks, you'd think you might see buy all for a split second, but no, you literally never see buy all, so that's not something to worry about. Now, what happens if we go back to DNA? Will buy all be shown? Yes, it works perfectly. So we can click on all these, and buy all will be displayed when it should be displayed, and it won't be displayed when it shouldn't be. So that works perfectly. So ladies and gentlemen, we've now finished creating the buy all functionality. It works perfectly. It has a confirmation system. The confirmation system is completely functional, and the button gets hidden when it should be hidden. It also equips the best tool, as it should, and it purchases all the ones that you can actually afford. With that being said, we're finished with this episode. Hopefully this video did help you guys out. As always, if it did, make sure you smash the like button down below. Also hit the subscribe button and turn this post notifications on if you guys want to get notified when I upload more of Roblox development content. Additionally, I do have a Patreon. If you guys like to support me, there's a link down below in the description. You guys gain access to all the scripts and the game file that I made during this episode, and you guys can support me. With that being said, I hope that you guys have a great day, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.